You are the hero of this story. This is how you can invest one day in yourself, make a massive mindset shift, and unlock this possible mindset.
Today, when I feel like people are lacking motivation, there's this real sort of epidemic of laziness, of victim mindset, but you're somebody who just like grabbed life by the horns, so to speak. And you did the seemingly impossible.
Yeah, there's certainly some of the things I've done have been said that were impossible before I set out. Well, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think it all starts with mindset, man. And I love to talk about this concept that I write about in my new book called The Possible Mindset. I define that as an empowered way of thinking that unlocks a life of limitless possibilities. And I believe that we all have the capacity inside of us to kind of unlock that and conjure that up.
It's amazing. And you've kind of like proven it. Like you're not just like talking the talk, like you've literally walked the walk.
Done some walking, walked some far distance. Yeah. Crossing Antarctica solo is a big one. Some other big adventure projects that I've had out there. But I'm sure we'll get into it. But it's also saying what I've learned from that is coming back and saying all of us, we actually all have this capacity to unlock that. And so to me, as much as I love sharing the stories of my life, and I'm sure we'll talk all about it, it's really through the lens of creating that, learning from that, taking that wisdom, and how can everyone apply that in their own lives.
I love that. Super, super applicable, super actionable, and a super important conversation to have. But I mean, let's get into the story. You crossed Antarctica. I mean, most people can't even dream of setting foot onto Antarctica, but you crossed it from what? Coast to coast.
Yeah. So in 2018, I set out to become the first person in history to cross Antarctica solo. So of course that means alone, but also unsupported. So that means no resupplies of food or fuel. So it means I literally meant that I was dragging a 375-pound sled behind me with all my food and fuel, which by the way was nowhere near enough to actually have enough calories. So I'm burning 10,000 calories a day, but I'm only eating 7,000. And that's because of, I couldn't pull more than 375-pound sled. And then unassisted or human power, which means no kites, no dogs, just sort of mano pulling this sled from one coast to the South Pole to the opposite coast, which had been attempted several times. Someone died attempting the crossing. People run out of food and had to be rescued during this crossing historically. And so people were like, look, this thing's impossible. And I actually called that project The Impossible First. It's also the name of my first book. Because some people say, now that I did it, they said, oh, well, you're just like a cocky thing to say, oh, I'm going to show the impossible possible. It's like, no, I called it that because I thought this might actually be impossible. But that's not a good enough reason for me not to attempt it, not to try it. Because I think that when we reach, when we dare to dream greatly, I think most amazing things in this world have happened, whether that's technology, whether that's art, creativity, people have dared to dream something that wasn't firmly in their grasp, but I'm going to try anyways.
Where did the desire to do that come from?
I think it, definitely would have to go back, into my childhood at some regard. My hippie upbringing. So I was born on a hippie commune, an organic farm in Olympia, Washington. My mother invited 30 of her friends over while she gave birth to me on a futon on a commune, while a bunch of hippies on an organic farm hung out, and they played Bob Marley Redemption song through my entire birth, apparently.
No way.
So a little bit of an untraditional way to come into the world. But my parents were super young when they had me. They were a big part of the health and natural foods movement. So they worked in grocery stores, and ultimately my dad's an organic farmer on the North Shore of Kauai. My parents are natural foods grocers in the Pacific Northwest. And so I grew up around health and wellness, but also around this sort of entrepreneurial ethos of like, if you can dream it, you can do it. And my parents didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, not a lot of financial resources, but I watched them chase their dreams. They wanted to change the world and impact around, farm, they were throwing around sustainable, organic, things that you and I know both care about deeply, but in the late 80s and early 90s when this didn't mean anything to the common person. And as we've obviously watched that industry boom over the last, several decades, it's been cool to trace that back. And so in a very different way of my life, but I think there is some ethos around that of saying like, hey, I can't exactly see it, but I can sort of grasp onto this thing that feels important. I want to chase after that. And when people ask my mom all the time, you must be so afraid of your son. He's climbed Everest twice. He walked across Antarctica. He rowed a boat across the most dangerous ocean in the world. Like, what was he thinking? He must be so afraid. It's a mother. She's always like, well, yeah, of course. Like, I'm afraid. But she also goes, careful what you wish for. When you whisper in your kid's ear from the day they were born, they can do anything they set their mind to.
Wow. Were there like people growing up that you looked up to that were kind of doing similar things, like Daredevil types, adventurers?
It's funny. I don't necessarily characterize the daredevil side of it. I definitely, the adventure side of it, I definitely connect with. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so I was around the outdoors. My dad used to say, again, he was an Eagle Scout. We didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, but he used to say, the outdoors are free. He'd be like, the outdoors are free. And he wasn't like roping me up and like pushing me off some crazy, intense climbing route. But like, he was like, what we did for fun. We didn't take, big plane rides to, extravagant places or stay in fancy hotels or anything like that. It was like, yo, let's drive to a trailhead. Let's walk. Let's go camping. Let's go on a mountain bike ride or whatever. And so less so of like really extreme adventure, but more so like being in the outdoors, being with nature, being comfortable in that environment, which I think is a really important way for all of us to grow and be connected to in a digital age where it's so easy, and particularly for the younger generations, to feel really disconnected from just the basics of the outdoor. I mean, whether that's Central Park or whatever, but just actually being outside. I mean, people are doing that less and less.
Yeah, I totally admire it. I'm a big indoor guy. Love the indoors.
Yeah.
Love the indoors. love a good climate control system. Love a gym. But yeah, but I completely admire the gumption and the courage that it took to do what you did. So what year was it when you started planning this trek?
So Antarctica was my, I guess, third big world record project. So it was built on the back of a couple of other big adventures. Before that, I did something called the Explorers Grand Slam. So I climbed the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents and went to the North and South Pole faster than anyone had ever done. So
whoa.
139 days consecutive, Everest, Denali, Kilimanjaro, North Pole, South Pole, etc.
Jesus.
So that was like my first big project. And then I followed that up by doing a project called the 50 High Points. So the tallest mountain in each of the 50 US states. Some are small, like Florida. It's like a 350-foot hill on the side of the road. Some are huge, like Alaska, Denali.
We had to do it.
But all 50 in 21 days. And so did that and then built towards this Antarctica project in 2018. Of course, I've done several things since then. But honestly, I mean, there's a little bit of a big turning point in my life happened, I guess, just after college. I kind of had the call of adventure, wanted to travel, painted houses every summer in high school and college to kind of just save up a little bit of money. And I said to my buddy, one day when we get out of college, we're going to like see the world. And literally we're saving up $100 or $1,000 maybe at the end of every summer, just putting it in a piggy bank and being like, okay, one day. And so when I graduated from college, all my friends were taking, jobs. I had an economics degree from Yale, which was a very untraditional path from a public school kid from Portland, Oregon. I ended up swimming there, but most of my friends were like headed off to Wall Street. And I was like, I'm going to take a surfboard and a backpack and like bum around the world. And people thought it was like a really bad idea. Like you're giving up this great opportunity. But there's something calling to me about that. Amazing experience.
And to be clear, you didn't come from money. So
No. Well, and I'll tell you what, when the Yale swim coach, this is a true story. The Yale swim coach called to recruit me. I was 16, my senior year of high school. I'm young for my grade. And my mom hands me the phone. It's a landline. It's 2001. It says, the swim coach is on the phone from Yale University. I picked up the phone. I said, Yale, I've heard of that. Where is that? That was my opening line. So that shows you how really fish out of water. It's quite literally I was at that moment in my life. But grateful for that education, certainly. But I felt like I wanted to have some adventure before just taking, like the quote unquote real job, I guess. And I went and traveled around the world on a shoestring budget. I mean, I was hitchhiking, I was sleeping on floors, youth hostels, saving up a couple bucks to have some beers at the end of the night, but like, on the cheap as possible as I could live. Amazing experience until I found myself in this small beach in rural Thailand. And there was a couple of guys jumping a flaming jump rope. And I thought to myself, gee, that looks like fun. What could possibly go wrong here? Unfortunately, it went terribly wrong for me. I was jumping the rope wrapped around my legs, lit my body completely on fire to my neck. Kind of the excess kerosene sprayed my whole body and lit me on fire. And I had to jump in the ocean to extinguish the flames. Thankfully, that was there. And that saved my life, but not before about 25% of my body was severely burned.
Wow.
Predominantly my legs and feet. And I was on a small island in the Gulf of Thailand, no proper medical facilities, a moped ride down a dirt path instead of an ambulance, like a shack, one-room nursing station instead of a proper hospital. Underwent 8 surgeries over the next week where there was a cat running around my bed and across my chest in the ICU. I mean, it was a tough set of circumstances, but the worst part about it, and this ultimately did set up a massive turning point in my life, was the doctor walks into me day 4 of day 5. He looks me in the eyes and he said, "Hey, you'll probably never walk again normally."
Yikes.
And it was because of how deeply the burns were over my ligament. So ankle joints, knee joints, etc. They just didn't think I would ever regain full mobility in my body again. And as any person at that place, let alone me, a young person with, identity as an athlete, it was just like the most tragic news I could possibly. And I only had myself to blame. It was like, you're an idiot. You did this to yourself, And I just went into a super dark place in my mind. I mean, I just remember this sinking feeling. The pain, the physical pain was horrible, but the emotional pain of like, wow, what have I done forever to the rest of my life? Kind of sinking feeling. But my mother, the incredible woman that she is, she showed up. And I know now as a mother, she was in the hallways crying, pleading with the doctors, super afraid. We're on the other side of the world. There's a language barrier, all sorts of things. But she actually never showed me that fear. Instead, she came into my hospital room every single day with this huge smile on her face, this big air of positivity, daring me to dream about the future and saying things like, "What do you want to do when you get out of here? Like, let's set a goal." And I didn't call it that at the time, but I now call this moment this sort of possible mindset shift. She literally is saying, "Hey, if you could do anything, you're in a bad situation, but dream without limits." And so I closed my eyes. I had this visualization that day, opened them up, and I said, "Oh, you're going to make fun of me." She's like, "What? No. What'd you see?" And I said, "I saw myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon." And this moment is the massive turning point in my life, which is my mother could have so easily said, "Yeah, I said set a goal, but maybe something a little more realistic." She literally says, "Great. That's your goal. In fact, you're going to cross that finish line and you should start training right now." Right now. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Doc." And she goes, "Doc," like this, puts her hand out. "My son's training for a triathlon. Bring him in some weight." So I have this picture of me. I'm laying in a hospital bed with my legs bandaged from the waist down. I've got these 2 10-pound dumbbells and I'm holding them up. I'm lifting them. I'm like, "Doc, I'm doing a triathlon one day." And he's looking at me like, this stupid American kid, but whatever. So anyways, fast forward, won't get into all the details, but fast forward, the end of the story is several months in the Thai hospital, flown back to Portland, Oregon in a wheelchair, carried on and off the plane, slowly learned how to walk slowly again, and kind of jog. Eventually took a job in finance in Chicago, trying to kind of get on with my life and put this in the rear view, but I was still bandaged up when I took that job. So I talk about my new book. I literally was wearing slippers to the job interview because I couldn't wear shoes. And it was almost like a year later. It was like when I was in bad shape.
Wow.
But I signed up for the Chicago Triathlon to honor this goal and ended up racing it, completing the race.
That's amazing.
And if my complete and utter surprise, I actually won the entire Chicago Triathlon, placing first out of like 5,000 people.
Wow.
And I don't tell that story as a way of being like, well, and the moral of the story is, I guess I'm just a super freak athlete. I'm awesome. Like that is, I don't feel that way. That's not my truth. And I just don't think that is the truth. I think the truth is, as humans, I think we all have reservoirs of untapped potential inside of us to achieve extraordinary things. We all, I don't care who you are going to face some amount of setbacks, adversity, challenges throughout your life. And thank God for my mother, because if I was left up to my own advice, I would have just downward spiraled. I wouldn't be sitting here with you today. I certainly wouldn't be sitting here with 10 world records that I set with those same legs after I was burned, not before. But it's because of that mindset shift in that moment, that shift to positive outcomes, that shift towards looking towards limitless possibilities. And I definitely equate all of that. So, too long of an answer for your question, which is how do we get here? That was almost 15 years ago now. But all of the things that have happened to me since have been a reflection of this really intense moment of actually going through, in some ways, rising through the flames of the fires of this challenge in my life, but getting to where I am, not in spite of it, but because of it.
What a story. Oh my God. So in those moments of darkness where you were confronted head on by seemingly insurmountable obstacles, I mean, you had your lower body burned, 25% of the entirety of your body, as you mentioned, but people have obstacles that are maybe not as extreme, some more extreme. What were any mindset tactics that you could share that you've maybe been able to crystallize into a real actionable sort of way that people can use in their own personal lives, right? Because we all have obstacles that we encounter on a daily basis, seasonally, yearly, what have you.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, it's a good segue. My new book, which is called The 12-Hour Walk, is really about this. It's about how we can take actionable steps to shift our mindset. So the subtitle is 12-Hour Walk, Invest One Day, Conquer Your Mind, and Unlock Your Best Life. And we'll get into exactly what that means. But at its core, the book is broken down into 10 short stories. There's stories in those stories, but 10 main stories. And each chapter breaks down one of the most common limiting beliefs that I think we all face, myself included. And the storytelling is from not some highlight reel of my life. And then I did this world record, and then I did this. Obviously, I'm sharing rich adventure stories. It's page turning, it's fun, it's engaging, it's edge of your seat. But it's actually showing me dealing with all of those. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. What if I fail? What if people criticize me? I'm not strong enough. I hate being uncomfortable, right? Like we've all experienced those things over and over and over again. That's part of the human experience as best as I can tell. If there's someone who hasn't experienced any of those, I'd love to meet you. And sharing from that perspective, at its core, the book and what I'm so excited about this new book is that it's also a call to action beyond the page. It's actually, and we talk about the origin story in a second, but in summary, the entire book is pointing towards, I say, look, I'm not the hero of this story. I'm sharing you some lessons from these crazy adventures and different things throughout my life. But you, the reader, or you, the listener of the audiobook, you are the hero of this story. This is how you can invest one day in yourself, make a massive mindset shift, and unlock this possible mindset. Take steps towards your best life, which is by literally walking out your front door, turning your phone on airplane mode, and taking a 12-hour walk.
Wow.
Silence, stillness, a day alone, unplugged, literally in a city, wherever, it doesn't matter. But it also doesn't matter how long you walk. I don't care if you walk for 1 mile. I don't care if you walk for 50 miles. My 77-year-old mother-in-law's done the 12-hour walk, and that's one time around her block and then sitting on her porch in silence before she does another lap around her block. I've had my ultra marathon friends do, 50 miles or something like that. Neither one of those groups are doing the 12-hour walk more than the other, but it's a 12-hour exercise that's a deep dive into your mind, your body, your self-awareness that has incredible benefits. Thousands and thousands of people around the world are doing this walk right now, and my goal is to inspire 10 million people to take it. It's
almost like a meditation. Like you've invented like a new form of meditation, or at least like coined it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, the origin story of that is when I was walking across Antarctica. It was 12 hours every single day that I was walking across Antarctica. I actually started out walking 10 hours per day. Didn't think I could go any further. And there was another guy who I was actually racing against in Antarctica, which is a crazy part of the story. I planned for a year to do this solo Antarctica crossing. And I'm getting ready to depart. I just did an interview with the New York Times. They're like really interested. Oh, you're going to do this. I'm going to try this thing. No one in history has ever done it. And on basically the exact same day in London, this British badass military guy takes effectively the same interview, but with the London Telegraph, and they both get published.
Oh man.
And it's like, he's like, I'm going to be the first. And it's like, no, I'm going to be the first. And like, we didn't know about each other.
Wow.
This was happening unbeknownst to each other. So before we know it, about a week after that, we are both on a cargo plane in Antarctica because there's only one guy effectively with a plane that can take you to the edge of the continent. And
you flying on the same plane?
There's one guy and there's only one season. So we both call the same guy basically for the same day. They don't tell us about each other, and we get down there, and now I'm shoulder to shoulder with a guy named Captain Lewis Rudd, who's the equivalent of a British Navy SEAL, like badass among badass, very, very accomplished polar explorer, way more experienced than I am at this point. And the British, they love polar history. It's a big part of their history because Captain Scott, a British explorer in the early 1900s, Shackleton, these like historic names, very long lineage. So like you never meet an American who didn't know who like Abe Lincoln was or George Washington. Like there's very few British that you can meet that don't know about these early polar. So it's like a big part of their culture. Not so true about polar exploration and Americans, but he looks over at me and he's like, American? Like, it should be a Brit that cracks this journey first. He's like really like in my face. And so we have this very intense exchange. I'm trying not to be psyched out. And I get out of the plane. We decide let's drop off 1 mile equidistant from each other. So the plane lands on the ice. I jump out. I'm alone on the ice, but the plane doesn't even take off. It just drives across the ice and he just jumps out a mile, and we like wave at each other across like the Antarctic tundra. And that's like ready, set, go. 1,000 mile race now head to head across Antarctica.
Jesus.
And I try to start pulling my sled. It's 375 pounds. I think I've trained for it. I told everyone I'm doing it. I take like a GoPro video. Oh, I'm going to do this crossing, whatever.
What's on that sled? Food?
Oh, pretty much all food.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I have to have my tent, my sleeping bag, the basics of that, but I didn't bring any extra anything, so much so that I actually didn't change my underwear for 54 days.
Wow. Gnarly.
Because I'd rather have 100 calories more of food on my sled,
Right.
basically. So, and that's where people had failed with this project. If you could take 1,000 pounds of food with you, you'd make it because you'd just be able to keep eating and rest when you were tired and whatever. But there's just no way that you're going to burn more calories than you can carry. So it's like, how skinny can you get? How much can you starve yourself and still make it to the other side?
Was in leading up to the journey, were you trying to were you on some kind of diet that was like in hopes of you packing on as much fat as you could or something like that? Like, I want to know about the physical preparations.
Yeah. So the nutrition component of it was actually very interesting. I looked at what polar historians or historically other polar explorers over time had done and thought, wow, people must have adapted this over the 100+ years that humans have been traveling to Antarctica. And it turned out that people in this quote unquote modern age were doing effectively what people have been doing 100 years ago, which is I just need as much fat as possible. So I'm going to bring cheese, salami, there's stuff called pemmican, which is basically like pig fat kind of ground up with some meats and stuff like that. And I looked at that and I was like, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's a better way.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, but like basically with my help now, again, parents as organic farmers, hippie kid, like whatever, I was kind of like, like maybe there's a different way. Like I've lived a lot of my life plant-based or very whole food, plant-based diet. But I also went in with the thesis of I want to study this and I'm happy to go with what makes the most sense. And so I actually spent about a year prepping for this in a food science lab, testing my body, VO2 max, sports science against food, inflammation response, thousands of data points. And what we came up with was basically a plant-based solution, but a solution that said, here is the most optimum food as well as the thing that weighs the least for the most calories.
Interesting.
Because that was the equation, right? And also can stand up in Antarctica, which is average temperature -30. So you have to solve for all those data points. And essentially we created these bars, one of one custom bars that were called, we called them the Colin bars. And it was, coconut oil, nuts, seeds, plant-based protein, a bunch of, different supplements that were ground up in there as well. And that's the vast majority of my calories. Now, Captain Lou, I told him about this as we're like flying down there, and he like made fun of me. I mean, and he was like, oh, it's, seems so fussy. We all know it's the salami and this. And I will say, later in the journey, day 40, day 50, etc., my body kept burning a lot more clean, I think, over time.
Wow.
And the inflammation response, I think, made a big difference. And
amazing.
I skipped ahead a little bit, but Lou kicks my ass on the first day. Like, I try to pull my sled. I can't pull it, so much so that I start crying. But what starts happening when you cry and it's -30 degrees outside, the tears, they freeze to your face.
Oh, no.
So it's like a bad deal.
Oh, man.
I've got frozen tears on my face, and I look over like, oh, this Captain Lou guy, he must be struggling too. And I look over my right, and he's just disappearing beyond the horizon, just like, goof, goof.
Was he just like a well-muscled guy? Like what?
Strong, badass dude. And like, he was just more prepared than me. Like, his sled was lighter. He had like, thought it through differently, different tactic. And in that moment, like, I was devastated. Man, I was like, I called my wife on the sat phone and I said, we called the project The Impossible first. She's my business partner as well, built all these projects together. She's amazing. So she's obviously emotionally supportive, but also like in the weeds of like all the details of the project together. And I was like, so we called it The Impossible first. This is day 1, hour 3 or something like that. I'm like, I think we may have named our project the right thing. Like, this is for sure impossible. And she's like, what? I thought you might fail on day 30 or 40 or 50, but like, you've been out there for 3 hours. Like, wow. And I was like, I can't pull my sled. So that's a whole other story. But I did catch up to Captain Lou on day 6.
Did you see him? Or
I saw him.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually saw him. And I saw him in the distance. And it's a whiteout day. And in a whiteout in Antarctica, like, you can't see anything in any direction. You're just looking down at this compass. You're staring down at it. And I said, 10 hours is as far as I possibly. I get done with 10 hours and I'd be like wrecked, like thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get up tomorrow and do this again. But that was like the edge of my own limit in my brain. And I see Captain Lou's tent and I'm like, wow, I found him. And, I kind of try to sneak past him, but I see him getting out of his tent. And the only way to navigate in a whiteout is, like I said, you've got this compass strapped to your chest. You're staring down at it. Like, imagine closing your eyes and walking through a dark hallway. Like, you're going to smack into the wall. Like, as humans, we can't without visual cues, it's hard to walk in a straight line.
Yeah, it's not like we have like echolocation.
Right. It's like you just walk in a circle like endlessly. So I'm just literally like, imagine just staring at this compass and like this endless white room that's trying to kill you.
Oh my God.
It's slow going because it's like you can't, every few steps, you're like, two to the left, two to the right, whatever. So I finally look behind me and I see Captain Lou standing there, no compass, just letting me navigate through the whiteout. Like he's just watching me, saving all the energy. And I'm like, oh, shit.
Wow.
So I let him pull up beside me, and he pulls up beside me, and he actually says to me, he goes, "Hey, good morning, mate." I'm like, "Morning, mate. Hey." And he's like, "I got a bit of a suggestion for you." He's all friendly. And I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, this guy's like a military badass. Like there's no way. He's like definitely messing with me. And so I say to him, I go, "No disrespect. I don't wish you any ill will, but let this be the last time we speak." Like I was just like lying in the proverbial sand, lying in the snow. I was like, "No disrespect, like this will be the last time we speak." And he's like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "I'm sure." And then he pulls up his mask because we're fully covered, right? If your skin is exposed for like a minute, you're gonna get frostbite. So we're full mask, full glove, the whole time. He pulls his mask up so I can see his eyes, and he just looks at me in the eyes, this grizzled face, and he's like, "Okay, suit yourself," as if it was like gonna. And I was like, "That's right, I'll see you later." But we're both pulling 300-pound sleds, so it's like, "See you later," and it's like, ugh, like, we're like still standing next to each other. An hour later, like, "I'll see you later," like we're still standing right next to each other. It's like when you say goodbye to somebody, you're in New York, you go like this, like, "I'll see you later," and you both walk to the same subway and onto the same platform. Awkward. It's like super awkward. So this is happening for both of us, and so I think to myself, okay, I'm just gonna ride out here shoulder to shoulder, pretend like he's not there, but I'm not gonna stop until he stops. I want to stop at least one step in front of him. 8 hours goes by, he's still there. 9 hours goes by, he's still there. 10 hours goes by, he's still there. I'm like, this is as far as I can go. I'm gonna go a little bit further. 11 hours goes by, and finally he reaches down for his tent. And I'm like, great. But I'm like, I'm gonna do one more hour. So I end up going 12 hours that day. And my wife says to me that night on the sat phone, she goes, "I'm so glad you proved to yourself you could go 12 hours because I've been doing the math back in the spreadsheet. And unless you go 12 hours every single day for the next 50 days, you're going to run out of food. You're not going to make it."
Oh my God.
And she's like, "So cool. You've done it once. Can you do it 50 more times without stopping?"
Times. Wow.
So the 12 hours itself comes from that, but that is not a story that's grounded in what can everyone else do. So we'll bring it back down to reality a little bit here, which is my body, even with this better nutrition solution, et cetera, was devastated by the end. I had lost so much weight. My hips were sticking out. My ribs were sticking out. At one point, I remember I raised my left hand where my wristwatch was, and it slipped all the way down almost to my elbow. And I thought, oh, I must have loosened my wristwatch. Weird. And I looked down. I haven't loosened my watch. It's that I was losing weight in my, wrist, which I didn't really realize was a thing. Like, yeah. I mean, my body was eating itself.
Wow.
Had frostbite on my, frost nip on my cheeks and face. I mean, I was beat up. And the crazy thing happened though, despite my body's weakness, my mind was stronger and stronger as I went. The stillness, the silence, the flow, the meditative bliss. I basically deleted almost all my music, my podcasts. I was just in this like meditative flow state for day after day after day. And when I got to the end, I completed the journey a few days in front of Captain Lou. The last chapter of my previous book, The Impossible First, is not, "I did it, I'm awesome." Like that's not what it's called or the essence of it. It's called Infinite Love, because at the end of the day, the clarity in my mind, I ended up just tapping into deep fulfillment, compassion, deep love for my family, humanity as a whole, the nonprofit work I was doing, et cetera. Just like felt like this overcome feeling of gratitude, love. And my mind never felt so sharp and so clear. And I thought, wow, I found it. I can take this with me forever. I was 33 at the time. Like I can take this with me forever. And in some ways that was true. Obviously, I'm sitting here strengthened by that journey and the lessons of that journey. But what I didn't realize is that, of course, I'm also not impervious to lower moments, tough places in my mind other times. And I'll never forget, COVID lockdown happens a couple years later, and I found myself in a pretty dark place. My previous book had just come out. I was on book tour, New York Times bestsellers list. We're doing the thing. Boom, all of that's canceled. I had an expedition plan that was canceled. I'm finding myself sitting alone in my small cabin in the Oregon coast, my dog, my wife, just sitting there like, not knowing what to do with myself. Now, obviously, I don't think my book tour and my expedition being canceled is what the worst thing that was happening in the world, right? People are dying. The borders are closing. I'm worried about my parents, my grandparents. It's just like a fearful time. And I think we all remember where we were, March, April 2020, right? And at one point, my wife looks over at me. She goes, "This is real out of character for you, Colin, but you haven't gotten off the couch in 3 days. You haven't changed out of your pajamas in 3 days. And you've just been sitting there staring at your phone, doom scrolling the news, mumbling about the next bad, thing that you're reading about, basically." And she was right, man. I mean, I was right back into that horrible, defeated, scared, afraid headspace. That I think it's only human to get there some of the time. But I was in a bad spot. And so I thought back to myself, when was the last time I felt super connected? Like just like in my body, soul, spirit. And I was like, it was actually when I was walking across Antarctica.
Wow.
And so I said to my wife, this might sound ridiculous, but it was one of the few things you can do during a COVID lockdown. I said, I'm going out tomorrow. I'm going for a walk all day long, 12 hours, like I did in Antarctica. I'll be home for dinner. And she just kind of laughs at me. She's like, cool, whatever, give it a shot. And so I walk out my front door that next day and my phone buzzes in my pocket about 20 minutes in. And I look down, my buddy's texting me and I'm about to text him back, I'm like, what am I doing? I've been on like Zoom calls and FaceTimes and I'm scrolling my Instagram. What am I doing? Like, I don't need my phone right now. So I instinctively just put my phone in airplane mode. The rest of the walk, no music, no podcast, airplane mode phone. And I tapped back into that stillness and that silence and that peace. And I get back and I walk back in my front door. My dog jumps up on me. My wife looks over and she goes, "You're back." And I was like, "Yeah, I told you I'd come back around dinner." And then she goes, No. You're back. Like, your spirit is back. She could see it in me. And she was right. What I didn't quite realize at the time, it certainly wasn't, I was like, oh, this is a book. I should tell the whole world about this. I was thinking like, I'm the guy who walked across Antarctica. Great. Like a long walk's helpful for my mental health. Like awesome. Like that tracks, What I didn't realize was, of course, all sorts of friends, family members, colleagues, people in my orbit were having an equally hard time during COVID, the true lockdown. And so I started suggesting this to people. I said, this might not be a thing, but I did this and it actually like really turned a lot of things around for me. I feel so much better. And not just the day after, but days and weeks and months after. Before I knew it, dozens of people started taking me up on this.
Wow.
Young, old, fit, not so fit, different walks of life, different circumstances. And people had different experiences with the walk. Like I said, my mother-in-law only walked a little distance, but, spent the whole day and vice versa. But every single person had a uniquely positive experience. Every single person came back and said, God, Colin, I needed that. I was feeling so stuck in my life. I have so much more clarity now. Any of these limiting beliefs that I mentioned before, oh, I'm afraid to take risks. I'm afraid to fail. I don't like being uncomfortable. And gosh, being alone by myself, my feet getting tired, I thought I would hate that. But God, it actually was so gratifying and fulfilling at the end. And so the book, again, the call to action from the book could be summed up in a tweet or a very simple statement, which is beyond the page. It's page turning, it's exciting, it's enjoyable, etc. But I'm inviting people to take this walk. It is free. It is literally out your front door. There are no excuses other than the ones that you self-impose to take this walk. And it is changing people's lives. It has changed my life. I've watched it change so many people's life already. And, again, I've set up a little bit of a digital ecosystem, become your ally in this, which is just say it's free. Come on my website, 12hourwalk.com, give me your email address and I become your accountability partner. I'm going to send you a couple emails and say like, hey, Max, you said you were doing this on September 10th. We'll see you out there in a couple weeks, whatever. But it's as simple as that. And why? It's because that's the world I want to live in, man. I want to live in a world where there's a reverberation of people living their truth, living with passion, excited. I think too often we live in a world where people's emotions are muted, where people are stuck. We're in a pandemic, an epidemic of, unhealthiness, whether that's in body, mind, spirit, etc. And I found this as an amazing way, a tool that people can have amidst many other tools that I know you share on this podcast for people to live a healthier and better and more fulfilling life.
Why do you think it's so often the case that putting the body in situations of physical discomfort have a mind strengthening ability? Like, how does that work? How does that connect?
It's funny. It's such a good question. It's something I spent a lot of time thinking about. I do think that there's such a good mind-body connection, movement, dopamine release, serotonin, things like that. Obviously, there's like a chemical components of that. But I'll take it a step further, which is I have noticed that how do I say this? I think about life on the spectrum of 1 to 10. So I think about these experiences that we have in life. Like 10 are our peak moments, right? This is falling in love. This is the day your first child is born. This is for me, touching the post at the edge of Antarctica and being like, I did it, like a great achievement, right? Surfing a perfect wave, having amazing sex, like whatever, 10, we all want 10s.
Yeah.
Like 10s are epic and peak
all
life
the time,
moments.
every day.
Like, yeah, give me all the 10s, give them to me, right? And ones are the opposite. Ones are for me, the burn accident. Ones are being afraid and alone in Antarctica. Ones are heartbreak, challenge, setback, COVID lockdown, anxiety, fear, etc. right? We don't want the ones. We don't want the ones. But when I really reflect on my 10s, I realize that I don't got there in spite of my ones. My 10s have been built on the back of my ones, because of my ones, because I had that elation on the other side of Antarctica, because I gave myself the challenge and the risk to be that far out of my comfort zone that I experienced many ones along the way to achieve that 10. And I find too often, and I'm guilty of this at times too, but at scale, I think a lot of people, I love the Thoreau quote, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And the misquoted second half, which is, and die with their song still inside of them. I think too often people are living in what I call the zone of comfortable complacency, this kind of area between 4 and 6. And it's a comfortable place to be. It's like, I got this job, it pays the bills. I don't love it, I don't hate it, but I go every single day. It's like 5, 5, 5. Or I'm in this relationship, like it's not toxic, it's not abusive. It's like we cohabitate or co-parent or whatever, but it's just like every day, 5, 5, 5, 5. Now look, having some 5 days makes sense. You got to recover, you got to rest there, you got to, recalibrate there. But a whole 365 of those in a row in a year, 5, 5, 5, 5, like that's not the juice. That's not the essence of living. People say to me, Colin, are you afraid of dying? Are you afraid of dying? You do these risky things. And I said, I'm afraid of dying. I don't want to die. I don't think of myself as this crazy risk taker. But what I'm more afraid of is not living, of not living. And I think that we can break free of that zone of comfortable complacency. In the 12-hour walk, your question was, how do we frame physical discomfort and why does it have such a mental, shift? It's like, yeah, if you go out and walk alone for 12 hours, I can guarantee you this, your feet are going to hurt at some point. Your legs are going to get tired. You might be a little dehydrated. Bring some water with you, right? Like there's going to be physical discomfort. You're not going to be at a 5. And when you're silent in your mind, when you're used to checking your phone every 15 minutes and getting that dopamine spike and being able to distract yourself, whatever, hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, alone with your thoughts, no podcast, no music, like you might be kind of uncomfortable. It might be that, that 2, that 3, maybe even a 1. But I have never known someone to not get back to their front door and have that pendulum swing the other way. So grateful that they pushed their body. So connected to their body, mind, and spirit. And so what is it? I think that it is something about the physical challenge of pushing your body, literally pushing yourself out of your physical discomfort into some physical discomfort to reap the reward of that 7, 8, 9, 10 on the other side.
It's so true. I have an anecdote that I would love for you to speak to because I love weight training. So for me, going to the gym and having like an hour and a half, 2 hour long weight training session, it's easy. Like I've been doing this for as long as I can remember, right? What I dislike is cardio. But I've recently made it a goal to up my cardio because I just think it's like it's really beneficial, right? Like I get a little bit of cardio from my weight training exercise, but I was like, I'm going to try to conquer this this cardio hurdle that I have in my head, right? Like mentally. And so I've set this goal for myself to go to the gym and to try at least 3 to 4 times a week, do a mile on the treadmill. I prefer running on a treadmill as opposed to outside. So it's just a mile a day. And some days because my cardio endurance is improving, I'll be able to go, I'll do a mile and a quarter, a mile and a half, 2 miles, 2.5 miles. But I don't set the expectation for myself in accordance with my abilities, right? Because for me, if I suddenly am like, okay, now I'm at 2.5 miles, I've got to do 2.5 miles every day. That becomes a bar that it's like too high. And what I've noticed is that when I'm on the treadmill, my body can often keep going. It can keep going to 5 miles if I really pushed it. It's the mental hurdle. That's the hard part. It's like pushing through my brain, which is saying, this is boring as shit. There are so many other things that I'd rather be doing. So how do I get past that?
So I love this. And the gym analogy is perfect because it's a frame that I use myself. So I often like to say the most important muscle we have is the 6 inches between our ears, our mind, right? And I say the word, I mean, I say this all the time because I'm an athlete. I'm very much in my body the same way, you are. Like, I love a good workout, love to push hard, and not everyone's there. That's not their expression, but you framed it around that. And the reason I say to people muscle is this. If I say, if a friend of yours says to you, hey man, it's summertime, it's coming up. I got to get the jacked chest, the big arms, the washboard abs. It's summer, man. I got me my swimsuit, whatever. You're immediately going to go to, cool. So like, you're going to do two things. You're going to go to the gym and lift a bunch of weights. And I'd probably recommend like thinking about your diet, right? Like those would be like the two like really obvious things.
Yeah.
But at the very least, you're like, that dude's going to go lift the bench press, do some bicep curls and like get ripped. Like that's the answer. Everyone's mind, even a non-athlete, because that's just like well understood. That's where people's mind go. Oh, you want to get jacked? Cool. You're going to lift weights in the gym. For whatever reason, we don't make the same connection with the mind. And that's why I like to say the word, the most important, muscle, intentionally muscle, to frame it around like you want your mind to get stronger. You actually have to do the reps on the mental bench press.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, you're right.
You've got to put those reps in. And what you're doing, even though you're like frustrated or whatever, like you're committed to it, you're like, okay, but I still did the mile. I still did the 2, whatever it was, any given day.
Yeah.
That's the reps. That's of course, the physical practice of the cardio, but it's also the mental reps. The 12-hour walk itself is obviously a very deep, immersive deep dive of saying like, hey, I say this to people all the time. Oh, well, I'm not fit enough to do the 12-hour walk. I was like, I literally just told you it does not matter how far you go, which means this is not something you have to train for. This physically meets you exactly where you are, but I'm also holding up a mirror to you and you're going to go deep into that mind and you're going to be flexing, straining that mental muscle. But what comes from a massive immersive deep dive, as well as a huge workout physically or a big peak event or something like that is, well, what's the ripple effect after that? You've strengthened your mind in a massive way, but now how do you bring that into your daily life? What's your daily practice? What are your mental, what's your mental 1 mile on the treadmill look like day in and day out to continue the continuity of strengthening that muscle?
Yeah. In your research, is there a certain number of times that you have to do something before it becomes ingrained as a habit?
I mean, obviously, I've read all this stuff. I'm sure you have. I think what does James Clear say? 21 days or 3 weeks. A lot of people say that. I haven't. I don't know if there's a magic number. I do think that just completely anecdotally, not scientifically, I can just feel this for my own self. Is that first week of any new habit shift? It does seem like it's the hardest. And I'll say, even the most extreme way, like in a lot of ways. The first week in Antarctica with the frozen tears on my face was the hardest. For a lot of people that I talk to who, do the 12-hour walk, they're like, yeah, it was like hour 1 or hour 2 where I was like, am I really doing this? Should I walk back to my house right now? Like there's something about that. And in fact, there's even something right before that. It's the inertia of like actually deciding to do the thing. So for me, I don't know if it's a number of days, but I actually think that getting past that initial inertia with any goal, if it's a food habit, a physical habit, a career shift, whatever, like that's the hardest thing is like making the decision. And that's why I literally at the end of the book or listening to this podcast, I say, go to my website, 12hourwalk.com and just commit to a date, pick a date. Like you're already like 50% of the way there because doing that for whatever reason, for most of us is one of the hardest things. I'm actually going to do that. I'm tell a couple people about it. Oh, okay, now all of a sudden I'm accountable to it because it's so much easier to like roll over. You never told me something about it. Your alarm goes off and you're like snooze, like whatever. Like I don't need to do that. So yeah, I think that accountability piece of it is pretty significant.
Yeah, and you mentioned inertia. That's a big deal. What is that for people that are unfamiliar with the term? Because I feel like that's there's a lot of pull, right? It has a lot of gravitational pull.
Yeah, so inertia, it's a physics term, right? So it's, forgive the physicists out there who could describe this way better than me, but it's the amount of force you need to move an object, right? To create momentum, to imagine a big boulder and you're standing next to it. Like how hard do I have to push on this boulder until it actually starts, rolling down the hill in front of us? And, I think that part is really significant to habit forming. I cannot be overstated. And one thing that I have found super interesting about the 12-hour walk, which is a really cool byproduct of it, but I didn't quite realize this when I first thought of it, which was you're listening to this podcast right now and you maybe are hearing this, whoever's listening to this, you're hearing this 12-hour walk idea for the very first time. And I always love to say the 12-hour walk experience, the inertia of it happens right in this moment, not right when you're walking at your front door in this moment. But why? So maybe there's a percentage of you that are listening that are like, oh my God, this is the greatest idea ever. I already went to the website. I'm signed up. I'm doing it tomorrow, whatever. Great. I'm so glad. I love your enthusiasm. Awesome. And maybe there's like 5% of people, or hopefully less, that are like, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I'm deleting Max's podcast. I'm blocking Colin on Instagram and like, F off. I hate all of you, whatever. Hopefully there's no one doing that, but like you get the point. But most people fall somewhere in the middle, which is just by virtue of a suggestion. Like I am giving you a suggestion. It is free. You can literally do it out your front door. But what happens? Most people are going, okay, your brain, whether you can't even barely help your brain in doing this, it is going to consider this option. It's just considering it right now while you're listening to this. You're considering it. And you're going something like this, like, okay, like Max is a cool guy. I love his podcast. I hope he thinks he has pretty cool guests on. This is kind of interesting story. Like, this might be good for me. Like, I might need something like this. God, I've been kind of stuck in my head or whatever. And then your brain does something like this. But I don't have enough time. I'm going to be tired and sweaty and tired. I don't really like being uncomfortable. I might tell this to my friend and they're going to make fun of me. They're going to like criticize me because it's a stupid thing. Oh, you're walking by yourself for 12 hours a day. Come to the beach and party with whatever, right? Like whatever's coming up for you. But I encourage you when you're listening to this to be aware of what just looped in your brain right now while you're listening to this podcast. And why do I say that? I say that because just the suggestion of the 12-hour walk is me holding up a mirror to your own limiting beliefs. The 12-hour walk is a placeholder for whatever you actually want to achieve and do and create and become in the fulfillment of your best life. And so if there are limiting beliefs that you're applying to the 12-hour walk the first time you're hearing about it, I'm willing to bet that those are likely many of the same, if not all of the same limiting beliefs that loop in your brain constantly, that are holding you back constantly from all sorts of things. But the beauty of it is this. I say limiting beliefs very intentionally because beliefs aren't truth. This is not limiting facts. These aren't limiting truth. These are limiting beliefs. Beliefs can be rewritten, reshaped, restored. You are the story that you tell yourself. And so if you in this moment are going, okay, he caught me. I'm putting it on my calendar. I'm doing it next Saturday. What happens on the other side of that walk is that limiting belief voice isn't going to be gone forever, but it's going to pop up and you're going to go, oh, hey, limiting belief if I don't have enough time. I remember when I was listening to Max's podcast and that came up and I decided not to listen to you that time. And I did the 12-hour walk and I'm so glad I did. And that limiting belief voice gets a little bit quieter on the other side of it because you prove to yourself that you can fight back against it. And that possible mindset gets strengthened. And so again, that inertia conversation, this is that moment. Those limiting beliefs, that is your own inertia that you're battling within your own psyche of saying, how many of these limiting beliefs do I need to overcome to do this? But when you do it, it starts the momentum. It starts the rock rolling down the hill. And that rock can continue to roll long after you complete the walk itself.
Beautiful. So there's like a spillover effect into other areas of one's life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's amazing. What do you do? I mean, on a day-to-day basis, you obviously you've done such incredible, remarkable things. How are you integrating this into your own life these days on a day-to-day basis? Like, what are the hard things that you're currently doing?
Yeah. I love to ask this question. I frame it, in what's your Everest? My childhood dream was to climb Mount Everest. I've been fortunate to do that twice now.
That's insane.
So I love that I was able to achieve that, because certainly when I said that as a kid, I didn't have the money, the mountaineering background, or any way of knowing how I was going to get there, but it still held that out as a carrot for many decades in my life.
Wow.
But the reason I asked that question to myself, but also to others, is I get you don't want to climb, Everest. You just told me you're an inside kind of guy that likes climate control. I respect the hell out of that, right? I don't expect everyone to go want to wander around in Antarctica by themselves and freeze their butt off.
I mean, I said that partially in jest. I do enjoy the occasional hike and stuff, but in general, I'm a gym guy. I'm a city boy.
Yeah,
so,
all good.
Yeah.
All good. New York, LA. Nothing wrong with that. I love both, two of my favorite places. I like cities as well. So the thing is that I love to ask that question, because it's like, I don't think your Everest is Everest, but we all have a goal, a hope, aspiration, many things. It doesn't have to be about achievement either, right? That can be making millions of dollars, but also can be impacting millions of lives. That can be, entrepreneurship, business,
writing
creativity,
a book, starting
love.
a podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All the things, right? There's an endless answers to that question. Only you or anyone listening can answer that for themselves. But what for me, like, look, like in this moment, like, do I have other physical challenges that I want to do? Yes. Do I always have a list of adventures and far off places that I want to do? Yes. But like, I love really the full tapestry of life. I'm grateful to have written the second book. Like the book writing process, and you know this from writing a couple books, like it's hard, man. It's a journey. It's an adventure. There is a lot of setbacks. There's a lot of heartaches. There's a lot of ones. But then when you see that book on the shelf, like that's a 10. At least it has been for me. And not because of the external, like, I did this, you should buy and read my book. I hope people do, but just from like a sense of personal satisfaction. Like I took the time to write this down. This lives on, even if the book goes out of print, I can, show my grandchild this day. Like I wrote down these adventure stories from my life, like they exist, and I'm proud of that. But what I'm really excited, and again, I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to come back to the 12-hour walk. What I'm deeply passionate about in this moment, and I think I will be for many years to come, is inspiring 10 million people to take this 12-hour walk. Like that is my current Mount Everest. And that's not from like hey, by the way, in the fine print, Colin gets $1 for every person who does the walk. Like it's a free thing. It's out your front door. It's free, literally. But it is to say, that is my passion, to ignite a global movement of this way, because that's the world that I want to live in. Going back to that Thoreau quote, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, and the unattributed part of, and die with their song still inside of them. I believe in our modern society, when we can be so distracted, when it's easy to live in our zone of comfortable complacency, just one day for people alone and in silence, moving their body, being outside, can have such a positive net effect. I see it every day because people do this walk every day and send me messages and notes and videos about it. That's the world I want to live in. I want to live in a world where millions of people are singing the song that lives inside of them. I don't want them dying with that song and still inside of them. I want them singing that song, a choir, a symphony of expression, of creativity, of beauty, of love, of passion. And if I can have one small contribution to humanity that even puts people 1% closer to that, that's something that I'm deeply proud of and willing to fight hard for.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
I didn't sleep very well during the whole pandemic. Like waking up at 3 and dread and being like, oh, this is it, And what I just started doing, I used to journal every morning. And then I just started journaling whenever my brain was like clogging.